From the last presentation, we have come to know about the 5 modes of operations defined by NIST. In this presentation, let's focus on the first mode of operation, the Electronic Codebook, simply called as ECB. As usual, let's start the session with the outcomes. Upon the completion of this session, the learner will be able to, outcome number 1, understand the ECB mode of operation. Outcome number 2, we will know the pros and cons of ECB. And outcome number 3, we will see an encrypted image to witness the drawback of ECB. So we know basically there are 5 block cipher modes of operation. Number 1, the electronic codebook. Number 2, the cipher block chaining. Number 3, the cipher feedback mode. Number 4, the output feedback mode. And number 5, the counter mode. And we are now in the first mode of operation, the electronic codebook. Let's dive into the topic of the day, the electronic codebook. Let's imagine there is a group of plain text. Say for example, if the size of the plain text is 300 bits. Let's also assume we have AES as the encryption algorithm. Now if we want to perform the encryption for this 300 bits, then AES can take only 128 bits. So obviously this plain text have to be broken into the first 128 bits, the second 128 bits, a total of 256 bits. And in the last block we'll be having only 44 bits. So no worries, we can append some zeros so that we can make the 44 bits as 128 bits. We cannot expect the last block to be fulfilling the requirement of any encryption algorithm. I mean the block size. So obviously we can pad zeros in order to meet the requirement. From this it's clear that we are going to process the data in blocks where each block is going to be having the size or the number of bits it's going to process is depending on the algorithm that we are using. Suppose if we are going for AES, then obviously the block size is 128 bits. In case we are going for DES, then obviously the block size is 64 bits. Plain text has broken into block and each block is encoded independently using the same key. It means, say we have broken the plain text into 5 blocks. Now all these 5 blocks can be encrypted without depending on the other blocks. Say if we have block 1, block 2, block 3 up to block 5, we know the size of each block. Let's assume we are using AES. Obviously the block size is going to be 128 bits. So now all these 5 blocks are not dependent blocks. They are independent blocks so that the encryption can also be performed independently. The encryption algorithm is known and the key is also going to be the same for the encryption for all the blocks. That is why this is an important keyword, independent. We will understand this when we see the diagram. And finally, you may be asking why this term electronic codebook. Let's go to the diagram. Then you will understand why it is named as electronic codebook. Here is the encryption of ECB and here is the decryption of ECB. As I already mentioned, the original plain text is broken into multiple blocks. If the last block is falling shortage, it will be appended with 0. Let's assume the plain text is broken into blocks like P1, P2 up to Pn. So let's assume there are n blocks where the size of each block is depending upon the encryption algorithm that we are going to use. Let's assume the encryption algorithm that we are going to prefer here is AES. So AES is going to be the encryption algorithm and obviously AES is going to take a key, isn't it? Now whatever we have seen for AES, all 10 rounds or 12 rounds or 14 rounds depending on the key size, this will be performed in this stage. So obviously the plain text is going to be converted into ciphertext. So it's clear that P1 is encrypted using this key K and we get C1. P2 is encrypted with the same key, we get C2. Likewise, we will have the last block Pn. This Pn is encrypted using the key K and we get the ciphertext. If you observe here, C1 is generated independently. C2, C3 up to Cn, all these are independent blocks. So there is no relationship between this block and this block. And coming to the decryption, now what the decryption algorithm is going to take? The decryption algorithm is going to take the ciphertext, the same key. Since we are talking about symmetric block ciphers, obviously the same key is used for encryption and decryption. The same key is used by sender and receiver. So the decryption takes the same key. If C1 is the ciphertext, then obviously it brings back P1 the plain text. Similarly, C2 is decrypted as P2 using the same key up to Cn is decrypted as Pn using the same key. It seems to be a very simple diagram for understanding. So this is how the ECB mode of operation works. Now why the term codebook? Because let's assume for this plain text P1, we are getting the ciphertext C1. In case we have the same plain text here, say for example P3 is here. Now if P3 and P1 are one and the same, I mean the plain text is same in multiple blocks. So obviously you will be getting the same ciphertext. So if for example P1 gives C1 means P3 is going to give C3 only. If P1 is equal to P3, then obviously C1 is equal to C3. The encryption and decryption operation in ECB is like using an electronic codebook. So we are done with understanding the ECB mode of operation. Let's analyze the pros and cons. Talking about the pros and cons, the first advantage is this is the simplest mode of operation. It's so simple, the structure is the encryption and decryption can be performed independently. And coming to the next advantage, ECB is ideal for short amount of data, for example, secure transfer of AES or desk key. Say for example, if you are going to transfer a very small data, maybe a key is going to be transferred securely. Now if sender and receiver wants to communicate a short message, in that case you can go for this ECB mode of operation. So this is ideal for short amount of data. Now you may be asking, why this is ideal for short amount of data? Is there any drawback when encrypting large amount of data? Yes, I will tell you that shortly. At the same time, the encryption works independently because all these blocks are independent. In order to generate C2, we need only P2 and the key. We don't require P1 or the previous blocks, isn't it? Because they are independent blocks, so encryption can work independently. At the same time, we have one more big advantage of having ECB is that the parallelism, the fast execution. I will justify this. Since they are independent blocks, suppose you have a big plaintext and this big plaintext is broken into blocks. Now you can encrypt any block at any point of time. P2 is not at all depending on P1 or any other block. Likewise, if you take any block, that can be encrypted independently since it is not depending on any other block. I mean, you can perform encryption in parallel, like P1 to P10 block in one computer, P11 to P20 in another computer, so that you can perform encryption as fast as you can if you have a better computing environment. Let's take a real-time example. You are watching a streaming video and you can navigate to any point of the video because you are going to retrieve the data from that place. So it's not depending on the previous encryption block. You are retrieving the data from that block. So having ECB is having that advantage. So not only parallelism, but you can retrieve the data from any point. Now you may be asking me a question. I already told you this is ideal for short amount of data, and in fourth point I am saying if you have big plain text also you can do it in parallel. I didn't mean that we cannot perform encryption for large amount of data using ECB. I meant that it is ideal for short amount of data due to some security concerns. Even if you have larger data, you can perform independent block execution so that you will get your encrypted data, I mean the ciphertext, as fast as per your computing environment. But the thing is, it's not ideal for large amount of data. But the power of using ECB is you have the parallelism. So talking about the cons, the first con is it's not secure for lengthy messages. That's what I told you here. This is not ideal for large amount of data. This is ideal for only short amount of data. Why this is not secure for lengthy messages? I will justify that now. Say you have a lengthy message where plaintext 1 and plaintext 3 are the same. And obviously you will have ciphertext 1 and ciphertext 3 as the same. Let's assume the attacker gets C1 and C3. Now what's the big deal if C1 and C3 are the same? The attacker might not be knowing anything about the communication, but when he receives two ciphertexts C1 and C3 are the same, he comes to know at least something related to this, that these two ciphertexts are the same, so that he may guess that the plaintext may also be the same. It may not be a big deal. Again, think like this. Suppose if you are sending the same kind of data repeatedly, the attacker will come to know that you are interested in particular set of data. Say you are sending an encrypted HTTPS traffic to the web server. Say if the attacker receives multiple ciphertexts which are the same, he can at least understand something that you are interested in a particular set of data communication. So that itself is a big clue for the attacker, isn't it? So this is the biggest drawback of having encryption for lengthy messages using ECB. So obviously the second disadvantage is the cryptanalyst or the attacker can exploit the regularities of the message. So we are done with understanding the ECB mode of operation and the pros and cons of ECB. Before we sign off, let's see the penguin example which is popular in understanding the ECB. Let's say this is the penguin image that I am going to encrypt. This is the plain text, I mean this is the original image. This image will not be certainly having the block size as that of the encryption algorithm like DES or AES, but it can be broken into multiple blocks and encryption can be performed. Now let's see what is the output when you go for ECB mode of operation. Now you will be getting the ciphertext, which is the encrypted text using ECB like this. Still you can see what is the pattern that is followed. Now the attacker will come to know from this pattern that this is still up and going. Though you can perform encryption independently, but this is not suited for lengthy messages. Can you see here? You can see the regularities of this message and still you can identify this. But if you encrypt the same original image or the plain text using other modes like CBC or CFB or OFB or counter mode, you will exactly receive this pseudo randomness. So when you use other modes, you cannot even guess what the plain text or the image is. So in this example, I have just taken the plain text as an image file. It doesn't mean that you should always take images in order to encrypt. The plain text can be anything. And that's it for the session. We understood the ECB mode of operation. We know the pros and cons of ECB. And we also have seen an encrypted image to witness the drawback of having ECB. I hope the session is informative and thank you for watching.